A name was spoken. Tom Hanks stood up. Jimmy Fallon's face changed. Time froze in the studio. The Tonight Show had seen thousands of guests. Legends. Icons. Presidents. But no one had ever seen this. Tom Hanks, America's dad, the man who never breaks character, the actor known for his warmth and composure, was walking off stage. Mid-interview. Live on air. And Jimmy Fallon, the host who laughs through everything, couldn't speak. The studio lights were still bright. The cameras were still rolling. The Roots were still holding their instruments. But everything had stopped. Because sometimes, a single name can shatter the carefully constructed world of late-night television. Sometimes, beneath the jokes and the games and the celebrity interviews, something real breaks through. And when it does, no script can save you. This is that story. It was supposed to be a typical Tuesday night. Tom Hanks was promoting his latest film. The pre-interview had gone smoothly. Jimmy was in his dressing room, going over note cards. The audience filed in excited, energized. Backstage, Tom sat in the green room, relaxed. He'd been on the show dozens of times. This was home. And then the show began. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The monologue went great. Jimmy hit every punchline. The audience was hot. The Roots were grooving. By the time he introduced Tom Hanks, the energy in the studio was electric. Tom walked out to thunderous applause, waving, shaking Jimmy's hand, settling into the couch with that easy grace that made him one of the most beloved actors in the world. They started with the movie. Tom told a story about shooting in the rain for 6 days straight. Jimmy laughed. The audience laughed. It was classic Tonight Show. Light. Fun. Human. Then Jimmy glanced at his cards and saw a note from a producer. A last-minute addition. A question about Tom's early days in Hollywood. About the people who helped him when he was nobody. The mentors. The friends who believed in him before anyone else did. "So Tom," Jimmy said, leaning forward, "I read that when you first moved to New York to pursue acting, there was someone who really took you under their wing. Someone who gave you your first real break." Tom's smile didn't fade, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker. A memory. "Yeah," Tom said softly. "There was." Jimmy, sensing the shift but not understanding it yet, continued. "I heard it was someone you met at a small theater in Manhattan. Someone who saw something in you when nobody else did." Tom nodded slowly. His hands, usually so animated, went still in his lap. "What was their name?" Jimmy asked. And Tom said it. Quietly. Almost to himself. "Michael." The name hung in the air. Just a name. Michael. Common. Unremarkable. But the way Tom said it, the weight it carried, changed the entire room. Tom's jaw tightened. He looked down. And then he stood up. Jimmy's smile faltered. "Tom?" Tom didn't answer. He turned away from the desk, away from the cameras, and started walking toward the back of the stage. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. The Roots looked at each other confused. A camera operator zoomed in on Jimmy's face, and for the first time in his career as a host, Jimmy Fallon had no idea what to do. "Tom?" Jimmy said again, standing up from behind his desk. His voice was softer now. Concerned. "Are you okay?" Tom stopped near the curtain. His back was to the audience. His shoulders were shaking. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. In the control room, chaos. The director was yelling. A producer flipped through research notes. They were live. Tom Hanks was breaking down on stage. Nobody knew why. But Jimmy wasn't thinking about ratings or protocol. He was thinking about Tom. The man who had always been kind. Who had given him advice. Who had always been a good person. Jimmy looked at the audience. He looked at the cameras. And then he did something no late-night host is supposed to do. He walked away from his desk. The audience gasped. Literally gasped. Because in the carefully choreographed world of late-night television, the host doesn't leave the desk. The host stays in position. The host keeps the show moving. But Jimmy didn't care about any of that. He walked across the stage, past the couch, past the roots, and stood next to Tom Hanks. "Tom," Jimmy said quietly, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "Talk to me." Tom didn't turn around. His voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. "I haven't said that name out loud in 20 years. Jimmy didn't push. He just stood there. Present. Waiting. And then Tom turned around. His eyes were red. His face, usually so composed, was raw with grief. "Michael was my best friend," Tom said. "We met when I was 22 years old, doing community theater in Manhattan. I was broke. Sleeping on couches. Eating one meal a day. I was about to give up and go back to California." The studio was silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. 300 people holding their breath. "Michael was the stage manager at this tiny theater in the village," Tom continued. "He saw me in a production of Chekhov. Afterwards he came up to me and said, 'You're good. Really good. Don't quit.'" Tom's voice cracked. "He let me sleep on his couch. He fed me. He introduced me to his agent. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Jimmy's eyes were glistening now too. "What happened to him?" Tom took a breath. "He got sick. AIDS." This was 1987. There were no treatments. No hope. He died 6 months after his diagnosis. He was 34 years old. The weight of those words settled over the studio like a blanket. The audience wasn't just watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing something sacred. A grief held for decades, finally given voice. "I never got to thank him," Tom said. "I was shooting my first movie when he died. I couldn't get back in time. I never got to tell him that everything I became, every success I had, was because he saw something in me when I was nobody." Jimmy didn't say anything. He just reached out and put his hand on Tom's shoulder. And Tom Hanks, America's dad, the man who made the world cry in Philadelphia and Forrest Gump and Saving Private Ryan, broke down. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Tom sobbed. Not quietly. Not politely. He sobbed the way people do when they've been holding something in for too long. When the dam finally breaks. And Jimmy Fallon, the host who always has a joke ready, didn't try to fix it. He didn't try to lighten the mood. He just stood there, his hand on Tom's shoulder, letting his friend grieve. The cameras kept rolling. The producers in the control room had stopped yelling. They were crying too. The cameramen were crying. The audience was crying. The Roots put down their instruments. Questlove had tears streaming down his face. And then something extraordinary happened. A woman in the audience stood up. She was older, maybe in her 60s. She walked down the aisle toward the stage. Security moved to stop her, but Jimmy saw her and shook his head. Let her come. She climbed onto the stage. She walked right up to Tom Hanks. And she said, "My brother was Michael's partner." Tom's head snapped up. He stared at her. "I'm Michael's sister," she said. "Sarah. He talked about you all the time. He was so proud of you. He watched every movie you made. Even the ones that came out after he died, we would go as a family, and we would say, 'Michael found him. Michael knew.'" Tom couldn't speak. He just pulled her into a hug. And they stood there, on the stage of The Tonight Show, two people connected by a man who had been gone for decades but whose impact was still radiating outward, still changing lives. Jimmy stepped back. He looked at the audience. He looked at the cameras. And he made another decision. He reached up and loosened his tie. Then he took it off completely. In the world of late-night television, this was sacrilege. The host always wears a tie. Always. But Jimmy wasn't hosting anymore. He was participating. He was present. He turned to Questlove. Do you have something we could play? Something quiet? Questlove nodded. He picked up his sticks and started a soft, gentle rhythm on his drums. The keyboard player joined in. A simple melody. No lyrics. Just sound. Tom and Sarah stood there, holding each other, crying, while the band played. The audience watched in silence, many of them crying too. And Jimmy Fallon stood to the side, his tie in his hand, bearing witness. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, Tom pulled back. He looked at Sarah. Tell me about him. Tell me everything. And she did. Right there, on live television, Sarah talked about her brother. How he loved theater. How he was kind to everyone. How he fought until the very end. How his last words were about the people he loved. Jimmy pulled up a chair. He sat down on the stage, not behind his desk where hosts sit, but on the floor, level with Tom and Sarah. He listened. The audience listened. America listened. And when Sarah finished, Tom turned to the camera. His face was still streaked with tears, but there was something else there now. Peace, maybe? Or acceptance. If you're watching this, Tom said, his voice steady now, and there's someone who helped you, who believed in you, who changed your life, don't wait. Tell them. Thank them. Because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And the people who lift us up deserve to know how much they mattered. Jimmy stood up. He looked at Tom. And then he started clapping. Slowly at first. Then the audience joined in. Then they stood. All 300 of them. A standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Not for a movie or a performance, but for a moment of raw, honest humanity. The show didn't continue as planned. Jimmy scrapped the remaining segments. He and Tom and Sarah just sat there, talking. About Michael. About loss. About legacy. The Roots played soft background music. The cameras captured everything. When the show finally ended, when the lights came up and the audience was filing out, nobody wanted to leave. People were hugging strangers. Sharing their own stories. A college student told an older man about the teacher who believed in her. A father called his own dad right there in the studio to say thank you. Tom Hanks and Sarah exchanged numbers. They made plans to meet for coffee. To share memories. To keep Michael's story alive. And Jimmy Fallon sat at his desk, his tie still off, writing in a small notebook he kept backstage. He wrote Michael's name. And under it he wrote, "Remember why we do this. Not for laughs. Not for ratings. For connection. For humanity. For moments like this. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The next day, the internet exploded. The clip went viral. 20 million views in 12 hours. 50 million by week's end. A hashtag emerged, #ThankYourMichael. It trended worldwide. Stories poured in from every corner of the globe. Jimmy started a segment called Michael's Among Us. He invited people to share stories of those who helped them. Tom and Sarah met monthly for coffee. She showed him photographs of Michael. Stories were shared. Laughter replaced tears. And Jimmy Fallon kept that tie. He framed it and hung it in his dressing room with a small plaque underneath. The night we remembered what matters. Years later, when asked about his most memorable show, Jimmy never mentioned the A-list celebrities or the viral sketches. He always came back to that Tuesday night. The night Tom Hanks walked off stage. The night a name changed everything. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments in television aren't scripted. They're not planned. They happen when someone is brave enough to be vulnerable. When a host is wise enough to step back. When a studio full of strangers becomes a family. Michael never knew he'd be remembered like this. But his kindness, his belief in a struggling actor, rippled forward through decades. Through blockbuster films. Through millions of people inspired by Tom's story. through a movement of gratitude that spread across the world. That's the thing about lifting someone up. You don't just change their life. You change everyone they touch. Every person they help. Every story they tell. Every moment they pay it forward. Jimmy Fallon learned that night what real television looks like. Not perfectly timed jokes. Not celebrity gossip. But humanity. Raw. Honest. Unfiltered. Tom Hanks learned that grief doesn't have an expiration date. That it's okay to break down. That the people we've lost never truly leave us. And America learned that behind every success story is a Michael. Someone who believed first. Someone who stayed when everyone else left. Someone whose name deserves to be spoken out loud. This is why we tell stories. Not to escape life. But to understand it. To honor it. To remember that we're all connected by the people who saw something in us when we couldn't see it ourselves. The show ended. The lights dimmed. But the impact of that night will echo forever. Thank your Michael. While you still can.